Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dr. David Childs. I am a professor of social studies education, history, and black studies at Northern Kentucky University. I also serve as the director of black studies at Northern Kentucky University. We're glad you can join us. Today we are going to deal with the topic of seeing myself in the curriculum, using more diverse resources in classroom. This particular presentation is a talk we gave at a recent conference for the Kentucky of the Council of Postsecondary Education in Kentucky. And so this presentation is for the same. Will be the digital version, the online version that can be circulated and disseminated. So I think that you will be able to find these materials very helpful. I'm going to be providing some very practical materials that you can take with you, that you can utilize in your own teaching and learning at the university level. But also, there will be some resources for K-12 teachers as well, because one of my roles is working in the College of Education at Northern Kentucky University. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here. As you can see, the title, just for a visual, I see myself in the curriculum, using more diverse resources in classrooms. So I wanted to start out with talking about the idea of challenging a Eurocentric epistemology. Epistemology is a word that comes out of philosophy, the the Department of Philosophy, the field of philosophy. And it has to do with ways of knowing, knowledge production, what knowledge we privilege, what knowledge that we put forth as the best knowledge, and what knowledge that we in society do we dismiss. And that has to do with historical, people groups, cultural knowledge. So, for example, much of African American history, and in terms of primary source documentation, has been lost because during the legacy of slavery, the era of slavery and enslavement in the United States of America, people of African descent were not valued. So, therefore, a lot of the records, writings, artwork, musings, reflections, letters, the primary source documents were lost because nobody thought enough. Even black church records, school records, nobody thought that many people, I should say, she had some white allies, but many people did not think it important enough to preserve the history and culture of black and brown folks, Native Americans as well. You can put other people groups in those categories, and even 20th century history and during the civil rights and early 20th century, lots of African American material and documentation that could give us insight into the way of life of, for example, rural blacks, urban blacks, and later in the U.S. Middle class blacks, what jobs African Americans worked at, what they studied in school, games, culture. A lot of those things was not preserved because, from an epistemological standpoint, people did not think black knowledge and culture was important, and so that's why I wanted to start with the word epistemology. So, ways of knowing, how we know what we know, the study of knowledge production, intellectual history, how ideas have evolved over time. So that leads me to an epistemological conversation, introductory conversation about whose knowledge we value. So we have two works here, complete works of William Shakespeare, and we have Color Struck by Zora Neale Hurston. Now, Hurston was a playwright as well, but generally um, when we study literature, and we study the best and brightest, we think about people like William Shakespeare. Primarily, well, obviously, William Shakespeare was a very talented person. He has made an incredible contribution to human knowledge throughout history that we can still use today. He was very prolific in his writings, and he wrote on a deep level. But part of the canon, that is books and literature that we choose as the standard to use in our classrooms, part of the reason why the canon is chosen is because they're white males. And the notion is that white males throughout history and currently are the best and brightest. That's based on a Eurocentric epistemology. There's that word again, epistemology. And that's based on the idea that Black women historically have not had much to contribute to society, especially in the time of Zora Neale Hurston. Her dates are, this particular color struck was produced in 1926. And it's a very, very fine play. If you want dates for Zora Neale Hurston, her dates are 1891 to 1960. And this particular work, Color Struck, is originally published, as I said, in 1926 in Fire magazine. And she's very insightful because she highlights the conflict within the African American community as it relates to colorism. The idea that one should treat a person worse because they have darker skin, and one that has lighter skin in the Black community should be treated better. Well, many people would blame the Black race to say, well, they're prejudiced against their own people. And yes, we have to take some responsibility, but this notion is rooted in the idea of white supremacy, that light skin is better, and the idea of light skin being attached to all kinds of things like intelligence, talent, the arts. And so as a result, what I'm saying is a person like Zora Neale Hurston has not been able to be appreciated because she's a Black woman. And she wrote during the time of segregation and Jim Crow and all these kinds of things. And so let me just take it to another level. We are missing something when we do not diversify our curriculum. Those are kind of my opening thoughts. Zora Neale Hurston, as a Black woman in the 20th century, can give us insight about life, insight about history that we could not otherwise gain or get from a white woman or a white male. It's not to say that white folks cannot contribute adequately to the knowledge production, both the past, present, and the future. But what has happened is when there's been a Eurocentric focus in terms of knowledge production and who gets to be put forth as the best and brightest, if that's only limited to people of European descent, we're missing a whole body of literature and knowledge and understanding about the human experience in life. So those are some opening thoughts I wanted to add. Here are some questions I want you to think about as it relates to higher education that this talk is rooted in. Why is it important to have a more diverse curriculum across campus? Does this benefit all of society or just underrepresented minorities? Why or why not? When university educators diversify curriculum, does this imply that using the work of European scholars is somehow wrong? In what ways can we be more intentional about diversifying our curriculum? What are the benefits of using diverse authors and other resources in our teaching? So I want to pause and say, these are foundational questions that I want you to look at as you go through, I go through this talk. I want you to jot down these questions. You can pause it and think about and reflect upon these questions. What I'd like to do as a teacher, I tell this to my students at the university level, if you could tweet out your thoughts, your reflection, you can do hashtag NKUCOE, or you can do hashtag Dr. David Childs, and share with the public these ideas that you find interesting or questions you might have, or share with other teachers, because that takes this presentation beyond the realm of a YouTube talk, but it makes it more interactive. Furthermore, I'll also tell people you can text it ideas. So let me just quickly give some introductory thoughts as it relates to this question. Um, Diversity is so important in terms of, because we miss out on important knowledge when we don't give, for example, Mexican women scientists an opportunity to write and publish their work and put forth their work. A person from Mexico may have more insight than us, or a doctor from China, that densely populated country, will have a different perspective on science and knowledge production than a person that's in Kentucky, teaching in Kentucky like myself. So we need diversity of ideas so we can come together for the human project. So in the same way, these ideas are not just for minority people. One of the things I want you to get is, when we talk about African American history and culture, I'm a trained historian. That's the lens I come from, and also as an educational researcher. When we talk about diversity, a lot of people will say, well, that's relegated to the Black and brown folks. And when we talk about women's history and women's studies, that's body of knowledge is relegated to women. But we have to look at it from a broader perspective than that. That women's history is American history. African American history is American history. Native American history is all of our history. It is a part of the human project. So we must remember that this is knowledge for all of us. When university educators diversify curriculum, does this imply that using the word "this is C" of European scholars is somehow wrong? And I've said that. No, this does not negate the incredible work of a William Shakespeare, or a FDR, the work that he did as the president, or Albert Einstein. We want to celebrate everyone. We want to celebrate the major contributions throughout history, both the past, present, and the future. And so many times when I do this kind of work, people will dismiss it and say, well, what if you're discriminating against white people? That's a really unsophisticated way of looking at this. I just had to be frank in how I said it. That's a really limited way of looking at this. Let's take the term Black Lives Matter. There's been the response, what I think is quite racist: all lives matter. But the Black Lives Matter folks are not saying, from an ethnocentric standpoint, only Black Lives Matter. Black folks are not asserting their authority as the best, a sort of black supremacy, but they're saying Black Lives Matter too. Okay, as a result of the police shootings that has been going on, there's been a thought that Black and brown folks are less important in society in terms of the way that we are treated. In what ways can we be more intentional? So I want you to apply these tools to your life and to your own teaching. One of the things I want to do that I think is of the utmost importance, I'm going to go back to my, and I did not add my email address, childsd1 at nku.edu. I want to give you a little homework, CPE folks and teachers and educators out there that are checking this out. I want you to send me an email, adopt one or two of these principles or ideas that may resonate with you, that you may find useful, and email them to me. Okay, can you do that for me? So I kind of paused on my presentation because I want to make sure that this is interactive. This is a one, Child's D1, okay, at nku.edu. If you could email me that would be incredible. Or you can inbox me, whatever. If you use social media, I'm on LinkedIn too. You're welcome to go to my LinkedIn page because it's very important to me that this is interactive and useful and meaningful. Okay, so I've done that. So now, Charles D1 at NKU.edu. Um, Now let's go back to what I was saying. This particular curriculum is not just for people of color. This particular discourse, this conversation, is not just for people of color. If that's what your idea is, you're missing the point. This is for all of us. So I just was repeating what I said. Um, I want to share as we talk about seeing ourselves in the curriculum, diversifying the curriculum. I want to kind of practice what I preach. What I've been doing for the past probably 3 years, I've been doing a project with NPR, our local NPR station, Cincinnati Public Radio. I'm in Northern Kentucky University. We're right there on the border of Cincinnati, Ohio, and Kentucky. And with Cincinnati Public Radio, we've been doing a project called Democracy in Me. And the idea is to curate a site that provides resources as it relates to democracy in general. So let's provide tools for citizens here in the United States and the US to be able to understand their rights and understand the democratic process and understand what it means to be in a democracy, broadly speaking. And design materials and lessons and tools and articles for the general public to be educated on democracy, but there's a particular focus on educators and teachers, and that's what this project is all about. I'm going to show you some of the resources here. This is a community project, and it's grant funded by the Data Foundation. They provide the website and the resources to be able to keep this going, and it's designed to be able to um, for the public, students, teachers, and those out of school to be able to go on and access information in a relatively easy way and learn from it, basically. So let me give you an idea of what you might see on the site because we want you to go to the site and learn from it. Um, this particular I'm going to show you a few resources for university educators. You might find, this is what I was going to say, you might find articles on history, African American history. Right up front, you see an article on Native American history. Since Thanksgiving is coming up, when I'm doing this talk on November 17th, 2022. We're right on the cusp of Thanksgiving, I was going to say dinner, Thanksgiving holiday. And so one of the things we thought we would do, I did an article on the history of Thanksgiving, the sort of accurate, true history from a Native American perspective. Diversifying the curriculum. So a lot of times we hear the sanitized Eurocentric version of the Thanksgiving story, but really Thanksgiving is a Native American story. The Wampanoag people and Native American history with resources and lesson plans. So it says, I'll just read an introductory here. It seems like we barely get through Halloween and the Thanksgiving season is upon us. Furthermore, as a society, we often rush right through the season because retailers are chomping at the bit to get to the Christmas season to make a profit. But as a culture, it's important for us to slow down and embrace the notion of Thanksgiving. That is the idea of being grateful. One thing that can help us appreciate the holiday a little better is to learn the history of Thanksgiving. Educators can help youth in their classroom by classrooms do this by surrounding them by going beyond the mythology surrounding Thanksgiving history. Going beyond that mythology. This is the image that we often see. Actually, let me pull my screen up. You're not seeing what I see. So my apologies. This is where I started out. I was talking about this here. Um, Thanksgiving, the Wampanoag people and Native American history with resources and lesson plans. This is the Democracy in Me website here that I'm referring to. Is for the public. It's for you and I to get resources from. And this is what I was just sharing here. This is usually the sanitized Eurocentric uh, portrayal of Thanksgiving. In fact, they did not really dress like that. Those hats and buckles that has come to be a part of the mythology over time. But the Thanksgiving story should really be a Native American story about it's a multicultural story, the interactions of European folks and Native Americans. This painting is called The Pilgrim's Landing. It's by Edward Percy Moran, 1862 to 1935. But as an African American scholar, I'm using myself as an example, I may have a different perspective on this particular topic. I may be able to bring insight into the topic that perhaps a person of European background would not have thought of. Conversely, they may have thought about something that I may not have thought of. We need both voices at the table. These are some lesson plans that I actually provided for some teachers here, the middle grade teachers. But I have resources for university teachers as well. Video documentaries on the Wampanoag history that could be used in history classes. I'm not going to click on some of these, but these are resources and references. This is I will click on this one. I think you will be able to see this. This is a website of the Historic Pataw Museum, and it offers some history on the Wampanoag people, Native American people groups that you can use in your classroom. For example, it says, what does word Wampanoag mean? Wampanoag means Eastern people, or people of the dawn, or people of the first light. Okay, so how insightful to bring this into your classroom, with your freshmen, your sophomores, for example, in a Western civilization class, or a world history class, or a U.S. history class. You can tie this in. So you can see these resources here from the Democracy in Me website, Native American history lesson plans. So all kinds of things that you can do, and you can even there's a comment box. I like to have discussion because I style myself as a public historian or a public intellectual. I don't want to remain in the ivory tower in my research and work, be aloof and not connected to the people. This is why I'm doing this. So I would love to hear from you. Send an email, have a conversation. Love to hear from teachers, my other colleagues from other universities. I'm at NKU, Northern Kentucky University. I want to hear from my colleagues from Western Kentucky, from Thomas More, other Kentucky universities, even Tennessee State, Tennessee, or NYU, various colleagues. Okay, so I want to move forward here. Here's some other. There's another example. Does my vote count? The importance of midterm elections. That's something where I educated the people. But I want to get to some of the diversity things that's related to our topic. We're talking about diversifying the curriculum. This particular article is called African American Cultural History and the Black Poetry Tradition that can be used in our literature classrooms. One of the things I'm going to do today is provide materials, practical materials that you can take right into your university classroom, or if there are high school teachers listening or middle school, it'll be applicable to you as well. This is kind of this is an online workshop. It really is, and we're talking about diversifying the curriculum. Case in point, African American cultural history and the Black poetry tradition. When we think about poetry, we think about folks like Emily Dickinson or William Wordsworth or the great poets, the so-called great poets, and they're great. I don't want to take away from those amazing poets of European background. But what we have done is whitewash the curriculum in the sense that we have omitted the importance of Latino, Latinx poets, Asian poets, and here with my example, African American cultural history, the Black poetry tradition. What I've done here is basically provided a crux of this article is providing poems and resources to dig further into Black poetry tradition. I started out being inspired by the poet laureate Amanda Gorman, and you can click on this particular link and go to what a poet laureate is, but also click particularly on Amanda Gorman, and that actually links you right back to that site. But you can go to see her poems as well on this site. Gwendolyn Brooks has a poem. She's a historic Black poet. The Pool Players. 7 after Golden Shovel. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We jazz June. We die soon. This poem seems to be a cautionary tale of about the choices we make as in our youth. Cautionary tale about the party lifestyle and the fast living life on the fast lane. Paul Lawrence Paul Lawrence Dunbar. This work was made famous by Maya Angelou. She has a book called "I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings," but Paul Lawrence Dunbar talked about this language earlier. I know what the cage bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass, and the river flows like a stream of glass. When the first bird sings and the first bud opes, and the faint perfume from its chalice steals, I know what the cage bird feels. And this is a metaphor about enslavement. So various poems here. Then when you go down on the site, you can see a database of various poets. I talked about Maya Angelou. And you can see their poems. You can use these in your literature classrooms. You can use these in your Black studies courses, in your women's studies courses, in interdisciplinary kinds of courses. In education courses, you can use these in in a variety of different kinds of courses to diversify the curriculum. The focus is not the simple idea of let's use some Black authors, let's bring them into the mix, but the understanding is we get a fuller picture of knowledge. We learn more. We're smarter. We're more intelligent when we diversify our curriculum. Okay, so I'm going to leave from that and go deeper into talking about our lesson. But I just wanted to give you. I'm scrolling. There's some things on bullying that you might share with your children. Christmas addicts here. There's hundreds of nearly 200 articles here. So danger of disinformation. There's an article on the whole critical race theory debate that you may want to check out. Multicultural children's books. Okay, let me go back to my PowerPoint here. So I was referring to the idea of diversifying our curriculum. The sort of why of it, I think, is really, really important because many times when we are at a school district or we're at some place and we have to implement diversity, there's sort of like a collective eye rolling, like, I can't believe we have to do this. And that misses the whole point. I think we need to think about the why more often, and why should we do this? And I opened up by saying African American history is American history. Black literature is American literature. Asian American literature is American literature. Black mathematicians are American mathematicians. So we have to think about it in that way, instead of we have to learn this for those people out there to make them feel better. It's a very limited understanding of what we're doing. I wanted to give you some theoretical framework for my work and my research around this. Give you something to think about. One of the foremost scholars in multicultural education is James A. Banks. He's out of the University of Washington, and Banks talks about different levels, 4 different levels to be exact, of multicultural curriculum. And that could be integrated into any subject. And I'm going to give you some specific examples. This is not just relegated to math, social sciences and language arts, which is probably the most easy way to do it. History classes, geography, integrating diversity into geography classes, history classes, ethnic studies, religion classes, classes on culture, classes on sociology, psychology. In many ways, it's easiest to integrate diversity into those subject matters. Same with language studies, whether it's an English class, language arts in general, English class, a class on Chinese, Latin American studies. It's relatively doesn't take a whole intellectual leap to figure out how to diversify that. But I'm going to a little bit later talk about diversifying science classes in terms of our curriculum, our math. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I just wanted to give you kind of a sneak peek of what I'm going to be talking about. Now, James Banks, in his multicultural education, talks about 4 levels. The first level is the contributions approach in terms of how we diversify the curriculum. And James Banks says that's when we do this work, but we're not taking it very seriously. I may be teaching a U.S. history class, and there may be a few sentences about enslavement, and let's think about it in terms of a textbook that's not very, very diverse in terms of how it handles, very progressive in terms of how it handles diversity. The conversations about various cultures and people groups seems forced. That's the contributions level. That's that first level. Second level is the additive approach. And you may, in that particular instance, you might have a unit on women voting. You may be teaching a U.S. history course. You may be doing a literature course whereby you are dealing with American women or European women, European authors. And you may be just thinking about white authors, but you may add a unit about black authors. That's getting there. That's the additive approach. Or in a math class, let me go back to contributions example. One, contributions; two, additive. Contributions example, in a math class, you might cite the fact that some of the Egyptians or some of the black Arabs, were mathematicians. You might mention that in class. But a deeper level would be maybe using an author or a mathematician that's a person of color and looking at their ideas. That's the additive approach. The one of the highest levels are the transformation approach, and then the action approach is the 4th level. The transformation approach is completely transforming the curriculum to think about how we might integrate, for example, black mathematicians in their work, or Asian mathematicians and how they look at things, into a math class, to an advanced algebra class, or modern scholars. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. And then the social action approach is putting these things into action. That's that 4th approach. Another work that I cite here is Enough is Enough. How C talks about this idea of diversifying the curriculum, deconstructing the curriculum. And that's what we're doing today. That's what we're talking about, deconstructing the curriculum from is really a stranglehold of white supremacy. A recent national debate discrediting the 1619 Project and advancing the 1776 Commission is based on the idea that the norm and most acceptable literature, history, and body of knowledge come from Western civilization. There has also been the rise of so-called critical race theory legislation that has attempted to curb so-called divisive language in K-12 schools and universities. So this particular debate gets to the heart of the matter of what I'm highlighting today. The 1619 Project essentially tries to center, there's debate around this, but it centers U.S. history around enslavement. 1619 Project is a long-form journalism endeavor developed by Nicole Hannah Jones, writers from the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine, which aims, quote, to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the United States national narrative. Well, there was a lot of backlash against Jones's work, and as a result, from a Eurocentric standpoint, there came about the 1776 Commission. The 1776 Commission is from a traditionalist standpoint that the history and knowledge should be centered around Western civilization. So the 1776 Commission, also nicknamed the 1776 Project, was an advisory committee established in September 2020 by then U.S. President Donald J. Trump to support what we call, quote, patriotic education. The commission, which included no historians specialized in the United States history, released the 1776 report on January 18, 2021, 2 days before the end of the president's term. So is a reaction, let me go back to my PowerPoint. The commission was a reaction against what was going on in terms of the 1619 Project. And it was a hearkening back to, here we go, trying to harken back to Eurocentric history. Because unfortunately, the thought is that when we deal with Black history or other kinds of history, that it takes away from the history of Western civilization, but it doesn't. We need to be, folks, more intellectually honest and not be intellectually dishonest about how we present knowledge. That's what I'm saying. We need to get a total picture of history or literature. For example, as it relates to the stranglehold of a Eurocentric curriculum, a recent U.S. history textbook published by McGraw-Hill reads, the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. Now you notice the word workers. That's a sanitized version of this history. It's misinformation. I repeat, quote, the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers. No, they were enslaved people. We should not be calling them workers. Workers erases history. This was a generation of people that a couple of generations of people from 1500s to 1800s that were largely transported on slave ships. Many died on the way between the Middle Passage. The ones that made it here were forced to work against their will. And so we really should not be calling them workers, okay? That's an example. This is a picture of a very sanitized picture. We've given this talk recently, and somebody pointed out this is a very nice depiction of enslavement. It's African American men and women, children pick cotton and cotton field and place it in a straw basket, bushel baskets. This dates to 1890. But this is a sanitized version. They would have looked a lot more tired than that, and their clothes would not have been clean. They had on their best outfits here. They were made to put on their best outfits. Another example, this is a recent Washington Post op-ed piece, gives another example of misinformation. Textbook publishers tend to mystify the reasons for the South's secession, largely because they do not want to offend school districts and thereby lose sales. Some of the most widely used textbooks today even insinuate that the South's motivation for secession was simply to protect states' rights, not to preserve slavery. And so it was not to protect, it was to protect states' rights, but states' rights to own slaves. And so this is an example of misinformation. This is the 4th U.S. Infantry, detail U.S. colored troops, 1864. High school textbooks too often gloss over American government's oppression of racial minorities because they don't want people to feel bad. But what about the minorities that feel bad? A lot of times when we say feel bad, we're thinking about the white children. But what about the minority students, black and brown folks that don't get to hear their own history, that their history is omitted? And when students come to the university setting, their view of history is often Eurocentric because they've been steeped in this curriculum that has privileged whiteness. The point here is not to discredit the history of those with a European background. I've said that already. We must present a more intellectually honest and balanced approach in our pedagogy. Diverse voices give us a more full picture of the human experience and can help offer a diversity of ideas. I want to pause here and remind you, as you're listening to this, you can send an email to childsd1@nku.edu. I would love to hear your questions, your thoughts, your reflections, how you can add to this conversation. What are ideas you're using in your own classroom? childsd1@nku.edu. Or you can go to my LinkedIn, leave a message, or find me on Facebook or Twitter. You can tweet something out. I would like this to be very interactive. Also, I should say, you can add things in the comment. That's probably the easiest way. Comment, leave quotes, questions, disputes, debates. But we need diversity. I like this beautiful picture because these are all U.S. citizens, from my understanding, coming in all shapes and sizes, different histories, perhaps different social economic backgrounds, different genders, etc., and so forth. So I want to give some examples. I'm a huge book nerd. I wanted to tell a little bit of my story. I grew up in a poor inner city elementary school. Often we did not have electricity. Often we didn't have, we didn't always have food, and we didn't always have heat. But one of my loves was the school library. I had a great librarian. She would hold books aside for me, and it planted the seed to really what I am doing today. And so I always think in terms of books. So we're going to provide some examples of books in terms of diversifying the curriculum, books and authors. So one of my favorite authors is James Baldwin. And this is one of my favorite texts, The Fire Next Time. Baldwin deals with the complexity of what it means to be human, a black human, a black male. He deals with all kinds of various issues, religion, culture, etc., and so forth. The Fire Next Time. And Baldwin gets at ideas and notions that other people outside of his race and ethnicity would not perhaps be able to get at. He can write about what it means to be a black male in a racist society. It's that he wrote during the 60s. He wrote during Jim Crow. So he can write about different things that perhaps a white male author may not be able to get at. Again, it's not to discredit what one of our European descent brothers and sisters might be able to contribute, but all too long, voices like James Baldwin have been omitted. He was the son of a slave, so he had a lot to offer to help us understand U.S. society. like W.E.B. Du Bois said, he was another African American scholar. He said, we African Americans have a two-ness. He talked about double consciousness, this idea that we can be in the world but not of it. We can be an American but not be accepted as American because we're black. That's the same idea. James Baldwin says this: color is not a human or a personal reality, it is a political reality. So in our advanced literature classes, even in our U.S. history class, U.S. literature classes, why do we think about it in terms of white authors? Why a lot of times, maybe not you, but when we think about an American citizen, we think about a white citizen. When we think about the model, the prototype, the stereotype of American citizen, we think about a white person. So conversely, in our curricula, when we think about U.S. literature, a U.S. literature class, it will, and I bet if we did some doctoral research or we did a quantitative study, we will find that most of the literature that's selected to teach a U.S. history, I keep saying history, a U.S. literature class, or history at that, most of the texts are written by white authors. And let me say it a different way. Most of the texts will omit the curriculum, the canon in that class will omit authors of color for the most part. Because when we think about U.S. literature and or history, we think about white history. And that's based on the legacy of white supremacy. That's what we're saying. And so Baldwin has a unique ability to speak to color and race and difference. Color is not human or personal. Color is not a human or a personal reality. It is a political reality. That's such a powerful term. A lot of debate has happened surrounding black and brown bodies. Wars have been fought. Just and unjust laws have been fought and implemented based on the color of people's skin. We just had recently a string of so-called CRT laws that were passed to quell the teaching about diverse people, about ethnicities, so-called divisive topics. And what it has done, in my humble research opinion, it has limited what middle school and high school teachers can teach as it relates to diversity and the history of Native Americans, African Americans, various Americans that are also part of what it means to be a U.S. citizen and various other histories. But it is a political reality. I like this quote. James Baldwin says, "Black has become a beautiful color, not because it is loved, because it is feared." And he's just talking about racial prejudice, because a lot of prejudice is around trying to stop people's potential. Another one of my favorite books, and this particular section is diversifying your books in a literature class or a history class. We'll talk about history in a second. The Color Purple, many people may know the movie, but Alice Walker is a brilliant black woman author. What can black women say to us that others may not be able to say? What can a Hispanic woman say? What can a Jewish woman say to us, a Jewish author? What about a Chinese woman? What insight can they add to us, to our lives? What about a white woman, poor white woman from Appalachia, diversifying the curriculum? They can give us insight into the human experience, to human knowledge that others may not be able to get at. Furthermore, I'm of the thought and belief that literature and the arts can get at knowledge and say things that maybe perhaps a sanitized textbook or a very sterile documentary cannot get at. But when we are reading a novel or some type of fictional work, historical fiction, it gives us insight into the human experience, what it means to be human, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a poor black woman. And that's what Alice Walker gets at. And she writes about the mid-20th century, that time period, the rural South for Black folks. She says, quote, "Folks don't like nobody being too proud or too free." And she's speaking, this is from Celie. She is the main character in the book. She's speaking about the limits that racial discrimination puts on our lives and the limits to people's freedom. One of my favorite quotes is by Sophia, another, maybe perhaps a minor character in the book. She says, "I had enough bad luck to keep me laughing the rest of my life. Sat in that jail. I sat in that jail till I nearby done rot to death. I know what it like, Miss Seeley, to want to go somewhere and can't." I want you to reflect upon that. Perhaps put that in the comments. What do you think? Pause and reflect upon that. What that means. Another one of my favorite texts by Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man. I can particularly identify with this, but I'll read the passage. Quote, "I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I'm a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids. I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible simply because people refuse to see me." And this was not a science fiction book. Ralph Ellison was talking about, as a Black man in society, sometimes we are not valued. So I always give the example in a horror film. When you're watching the classic horror films and there's a Black character in there, it's a running joke. All too often, the Black character is the first person to die because in terms of how we view and value people in society, Black males are on the low on the totem pole, the so-called totem pole, and in terms of how we value, they're expendable in the movie plot. That's why when Jordan Peele began to write, he began to make Black folks the protagonists, or the whole genre of Afrofuturism that described the world before colonization, or a world that would have been if colonization did not exist. And so privileging people of color, that makes folks uncomfortable. But Ellison is very insightful. And he says that he's often overlooked. He's made invisible. His life is invisible. Very powerful. I talked about Zora Neale Hurston earlier. Their eyes were watching God. And she is one of the most brilliant authors that ever existed. But often, you can take an American literature class and not even use or mention her work, or folks like her, folks like Alice Walker, or Toni Morrison, her Bluest Eyes. Although that's changing in some classes, but for the most part, when we get literature, you may sit in the class the whole semester and not learn about one author of color, and barely learn about a woman author, let alone a woman author of color. Zora Neale Hurston, in her classic text, "Their Eyes Were Watching God," says, quote, "The familiar people and things had failed her, so she hung over the gate and looked up the road towards way off." I love that part, towards way off. Such beautiful writing. She knew now that marriage did not make love. Janie's first dream was dead, so she became a woman. This particular passage, and I'll let you process what it means to you. But for intents and purposes of our talk, this passage, it highlights the fact that there are things that Zora can say as a Black woman that I can't write about. I don't have that existential experience. That's not my phenomenology. That's not how I lived. She's writing from her lived experience, in other words. And so as you plan your curriculum, diversify. What if you did an American literature class using all Black women? Why would that be a problem? Because often you do American literature class with all Black males. We're just taking a certain glimpse of U.S. history. We're not saying that blackness is better, but what people are saying is that whiteness is the best. That's what have been said throughout history. That's why I'm doing this talk. But diversifying our curriculum. In the same way, we can talk about diverse authors in history classes. You want to think about using Black historians or brown historians or Asian historians. If you're in a U.S. history class, seek out women scholars that teach U.S. history. Seek out those textbooks that are written perhaps outside of the McGraw-Hills or the Sages. And I'm a Sage author. I published my novel. I'll talk to you about that a little bit later, historical fiction novel from Sage. But look outside of the mainstream authors and try to find some Latinx authors that can help you teach a particular time period, maybe a U.S. history survey course. You can have a series of women artists, Black women authors and scholars that can help you. Most of the universities have, not most, some universities, you have to do your homework, have Asian scholars or Black scholars that are writing about whatever time period you're teaching. Western civilization. How about if you taught a class on African history that you use all African authors? Wouldn't that make sense? All Black authors, African or African American. If you're teaching a course on Latin American history, wouldn't it make sense for us to do the heavy lifting and do our homework and find all Latinx authors? Diversifying the curriculum. This is John Hope Franklin, one of the foremost U.S. history scholars. One of his books is From Slavery to Freedom. He says, he's speaking about the South's strange obsession with maintaining a racial hierarchy. Quote, South's obsession was to maintain a government, an economy, an arrangement of the sexes, a relationship of the races, a social system that had never existed, except in the fertile imagination of those who would not confront either the reality that existed or the change that would bring them closer to reality, unquote. He calls it an obsession to maintain a social order, a government, an economy, relationship, even keeping women relegated to second classness, and where the races are second class. A culture in the South that will have fought violently to maintain that social order. So he's critical of that. And really only a Black author could say something like that, perhaps. Now, there's a debate that says, can white authors talk about African American history? Can they write about it? Of course. Some of my best teachers, U.S. history teachers, African American history teachers, have been white authors. My African history, I had a doctoral course on African history, and it was taught by an Asian scholar, and it was amazing. So, but what I am saying is, what is wrong is to omit Black and brown authors and not even think about using their work in your classrooms. Paulo Freire is a Latin American scholar. He's well known. He's passed away. His well-known book is Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And in a history class, if we want to think about oppression, freedom, and slavery, this is the perfect author to use. He says, quote, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful and not to be neutral. Quote, secondly, the oppressed, instead of striving for liberation, tend themselves to become oppressors. And Paulo Freire witnessed a lot of oppression and went through himself so he could write about racism and oppression. That last quote, attempting to liberate the oppressed without their reflective participation in the act of liberation is to treat them as objects that must be saved from a burning building, unquote. In other words, to help a person and not really ask them what help they need or try to get an understanding of them is to objectify them. Going deeper, diverse scholars in physical science courses. Here are some images of some Black women that are scientists. So seek out, I've said this earlier, seek out projects and assignments that privilege Black and brown authors, Black and brown scholars. Furthermore, seek out publications that women in general, white women as well, have written. Because the idea in the STEM field is that the people that know best and are the highest intellects are white males. And and I'm being redundant when I say this, but I'm saying it intentionally. We are not saying that white males are not intelligent and have not contributed to the project of human learning throughout history, the social historical project. But what we are saying is it's intellectually dishonest to just include white males and not do our homework. Really, we're lazy. And I know you've been using the same text since graduate school, and that's what your professor used, white males. But you're gonna and I'm gonna tell you, this involves heavy lifting, rethinking your curriculum. Um, I want to say a little bit about Dr. Collins here. Um, Dr. Collins is a foremost scholar in the sciences. Her dates are 1922 to 1996. She passed. She was an African American child prodigy. She was an entomologist, which is a zoologist. Otherwise, she specialized in the study of termites and was a civil rights advocate. And I shared one of her pieces there in the PowerPoint. I'll get back to that. Let me scroll here. Some of her works, Science and the Question of Human Equality, that's the one I highlighted. Another piece she did you could use in your biology class, Water Relations and Termites. So there are other works that she has done. You can follow her. You can, many of these individuals, you can find interviews. Just imagine if you introduce your students to these individuals at the university level, but also to my high school teachers that are out there listening. Imagine if you had students do a project on her ideas and exploring her ideas. I think it could be very powerful. Another scholar that I think is really fascinating, Ronald Maurice Jefferson, and he worked for the United States National Arboretum. His work, the work I'm highlighting here, is Crab Apples of Documented Authentic Origin. I want to share a little bit of just briefly about his work as well, because I think it's really, really important to highlight these individuals. James, oops, I'm sorry, I had the wrong page up. Ronald Maurice Jefferson Collection. Um, the National Agricultural Library has the Ronald Maurice Jefferson Collection. Um, his dates, he was born in 1923 in Washington, D.C. Dr. Jefferson, he attended college under the GI Bill. He did international work. He visited a Japanese garden, and he's known for so much work around apple trees and agriculture. So he's a scientist in that way. So I just wanted to highlight his work. And this is somebody that probably most people that's listening has never heard of. And again, he's Dr. Ronald Maurice Jefferson. And thankfully, they are preserving his work and what he did and some of the things that he did. I had a few more notes I wanted to add, but I'm going to move forward. So just remember that we want to diversify the curriculum, not just to do it, not just so that we can get more African American people of African descent in our curriculum, but it's for human learning and human. We are missing something when we omit certain bodies of language. So let's keep that in mind. Okay, let me go back to my PowerPoint here. So that's Dr. Jefferson. Very fascinating information here. These are some black women scientists. Catherine Goebel Johnson. She was an African American physicist. She is an African American physicist and mathematician. Worked for NASA for decades. Dr. April Erickson Jackson. She was an aerospace engineer. The first black woman to earn a Ph.D. in mechanical engineering from Howard University. We can use their work in our classrooms. If it's an engineering class, we can make references. If it's a math class, advanced mathematics. Macy Jamison became the first African American woman to be admitted into an astronaut training program. Alexa Kennedy, the first female African American neurosurgeon. Dr. Patricia Bath, she was an ophthalmologist and inventor. Because sometimes people say, well, there are no black scholars, there are no Latinx scholars out there. When people go through the hiring process, they say we couldn't find anybody qualified. Part of the issue is people do not do their homework and they lazily just default to what they think, their mental models, and what's accessible. But if we dig deeper, it didn't take me long to do this research. We can find there's a wealth of individuals out there that can contribute to our learning. Dr. Jedediah Isler, she was an astrophysicist. She studied supermassive hyperblack holes. So advanced sciences, we can use their work. We don't have to default to white males, okay? I think you get it. In whatever field we teach, we can think about diversifying our curriculum. Other examples include in the visual arts, you can highlight the works of black and brown painters and sculptors. For example, during the Harlem Renaissance, there was a proliferation of black artists. This particular picture here, you see Edmonia Lewis. Edmonia Lewis was actually a black sculptor that painted during the late 1800s. I said painted, she did sculptures during the late 1800s. And she was prolific, black woman. I want to just share something from Edmonia Lewis. Her dates were 1844 to 1907. She was an American sculptor of mixed African and Native American ancestry. Her famous work was Forever Free, but this is another piece she did, Hiawatha. So she was a wonderful, wonderful sculptor. So just keep that in mind. Using her work is a great example. Spanish and Latin American studies, highlighting the work of Afro-Latinx. A lot of times when we think about Hispanic people, we think about white Hispanics, but understand there's millions of Afro-Latinx folks out there, authors and artists. Another area is advanced mathematics, differential equations, number theory courses, linear algebra courses, multivariable calculus courses. Seek out the work of current scholars of color and integrate it in a meaningful way in your curriculum. Remember we talked about James Banks, those different levels. The contributions level is not taking it serious. Second is the additive level. That's sort of, maybe you have a unit that's highlighting scholars of color or different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. That third level, that transformation approach, you are getting a mixture of scholars of color into your curriculum. Diverse scholars, okay? Um, one of my favorite people, Dr. William A. Massey, he's currently at Princeton University. He was the first African American to be tenured in the math department at Princeton, and he teaches advanced mathematics. You can find his work out there. You can use it in your classroom. Some of his research interests: queuing theory, applied probability, stochastic processes, special functions, performance modeling of telecommunication systems. Brilliant, brilliant scholar, Dr. Massey. Just want to give you some examples. And I'll close out with sharing a bit more of my own research, my own writing as a Black scholar, as an African American scholar who grew up as a child in poverty. That helps me bring a perspective that perhaps otherwise people would not be able to bring. I identify as a male, heterosexual male, so I bring that particular lens to the conversation. Okay, so I'm going to share some of my own work here. I think I will start off with going to say a little bit more about democracy and me. Okay, that's what I was going to do. No wonder I went off the screen there. Okay, I'm going to go to another screen. We started out talking about the Democracy and Me project. I want to say a little bit more about that because it fits into what we have been talking about. Celebrating Black joy through the historic Black film tradition. In recent African American scholarship, African American history scholarship, we have talked about the idea of Black joy. Black joy is teaching history and culture, African American culture, that's not always centered on the struggle and enslavement. Now, we do not want to omit conversations about the struggle, but we want to make sure that we don't just talk about enslavement, that we're not just talking about the Jim Crow South and lynchings. We don't want to forget that. We want to teach that rigorously and vigorously, but also what that does is cause people to think that nothing positive ever happened in the history of Black culture and Black, cultural history. So we use the term Black joy to talk about the positive aspects of Black history and culture. So, for example, there is the celebration of the whole historic Black film tradition. And that's what this particular Democracy and Me article is all about. There's Sidney Poitier. He receives the Oscar, first Black man to receive the Oscar, Black Joy, 1964. There's all kinds of links here. This article gives the history of the Black film tradition. There's Hattie McDaniel, Going with the Wind. There is, I mentioned him earlier, Jordan Peele. He's writing Black horror films with Black protagonists. That's very significant as it relates to history. We can bring these resources into our film history classes. Or I actually use these resources in my regular U.S. history classes because this is U.S. history. Again, when we think about U.S. history, we think about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, white history. And it's really important when we're studying U.S. history that we study Abraham Lincoln. How can you study U.S. history without studying Abraham Lincoln? In fact, he's one of my favorite people to study. One of the things that drew me into history was folks like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And how can you talk about the Civil War without talking about Abraham Lincoln? But that's not the end of the story. We need a more total picture, a more full picture of U.S. history. And so there's this whole Black film tradition that most people may not know about. It goes back to as early as 1918. Nowadays, with our new technology, we can make things, you can link videos to your material. So, for example, this is a film called Black Sherlock Holmes. It's kind of a comedy, but it's a very unique perspective that's outside of the black exploitation, that outside of the idea of making black people criminals and idiots or buffoons. So there's a whole tradition here. Reckless Rover, Mercy, The Mummy Mumbled. So there's some black horror films from the early 20th century. Uh, Harlem is Heaven. That's a religious piece that I think is very fascinating. I've seen that before. It's really good, and most of these are clickable, where you can go right to the film. Here, I'm not gonna play it. I just wanted to let you know you can watch the entire film. I don't have the sound on. Perhaps I should have did that. Well, let me hurry up and do it. Well, as you classroom, imagine teaching U.S. history with this material, diversifying the curriculum. Okay. Um, so that's what this whole article is dedicated to. With there's a couple other religious pieces. The Negro Soldier, very fascinating. Created by the United States Department of War, this documentary capturing the day-to-day life of Negro soldiers is told through the narrow lens of accessibility to produce a tidy propaganda film. So this is considered a black film because it's about African Americans, but it's not produced by a black person. It's produced by U.S. Department of War. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this kind of thing, just go through and look at the resources. It's designed for teachers. Um, there, it's divided into genres. There are black westerns, the black exploitation tradition, music, sports, comedy. Um, Different resources here for teaching. There are some questions you can answer. Again, I encourage you, if you wouldn't mind, leave a question or a comment, um, or email me, just to make this interactive. Okay. Um, so that's that. I want to show you one more resource in terms of curriculum that I think is fascinating. This is another article I did that centers exactly to what that connects to exactly what we're talking about today: the re-education of our children toward a more diverse curriculum. This particular article here, I talk about my own experience as a poor black child going through in the American school system. But it gets at some of the early literature that I used that was racist. They portrayed the white folks as beautiful and having a good time, and the black characters in these early Basil readers, the Dick and Jane series, were often portrayed in a very unattractive way. And I remember being embarrassed when I was in school reading these books, and I thought it didn't reflect me. So get into Black Cowboys there. A more recent piece I'm working on is on that, love and Black Cowboys. But also a project we're doing with Karen Parsons of Hillary, the Fresh Prince of Bel Air. Her character is Hillary from the Fresh Prince of Bel Air. She has a production company called Sweet Blackberry, and it's great. You can incorporate some of her resources into your classroom. Her whole project is to provide educational materials on Black history for the elementary, middle school, but these can be used in education classes, teacher education classes. She's become an author, so she's still in the film world, but she has pivoted and become an author. and is producing films for African American history, um, teaching African American history. This is one of her books, Flying Free: How Bessie Coleman's Dream Took Flight. And so there are other resources. What we've done here is created lesson plans around some of the reading materials. There's another book Karen Parsons did, Garrett's Gift. So just a whole, what I'm trying to help you to understand is a whole lot of resources here. Just particularly one is for elementary teachers about Henry Box Brown. It's a book that Karen Parsons wrote as well. So please feel free to utilize these resources. One other thing I want to show you as a book project I've done as a Black author. I had to find the book here. Remember how we were saying that many times people of color can get at topics that others may not be able to get at. And so this was my attempt at a novel. It's actually a historical fiction novel. And I thought to myself, my colleague and I, we wrote this together, Dr. James C. Stone. We thought, let's write a text for our students to teach them literature, teach them American history, but particularly about enslavement, American slavery. And let's talk about poor whites during that time period. Let's talk about young people that were enslaved and what life was like on the plantation. So that's what it's all about. It's called Escaping from Home, a novel about slavery and freedom. Um, and so you can do what I did. You can bring your own materials or partner. In fact, let me say this: my colleague that I wrote this with is a white male, and so we partnered together. And he asked me to talk about some things from the perspective of Black male in our classroom. We were co-teaching, and we developed our own material. And so this is something you might do as well. And here is as I close out here. Um, there's the image of that book, Escaping from Home, a novel about slavery and freedom. Samuel Stilts, this is the description. Samuel Stilts has gotten um, them in trouble again. When they are caught stealing a horse, they find themselves on a plantation in the South, working side by side with enslaved Africans. Samuel changes forever when he befriends Nathaniel. He befriends Nathaniel, a slave preacher, and other people on the plantation. So that's basically um, what what I have to say today. I'm toggling back and forth, excuse me, between different screens. There are the guiding questions that I wanted to bring up back before you. Um, why is it important to diversify the curriculum across campus? I think we answered that. Does this benefit all of society or just underrepresented minorities? I think we talked about that. When university educators diversify curriculum, does this imply that using the work of European scholars is somehow wrong? I think that's the argument people make, but it's a futile argument. It's not valid. Okay, in what ways? Because there's enough space for all of us to talk about our experiences. In what ways can we be more intentional about diversifying our curriculum? That's my charge to you. What you might do is take these questions and either put them, answer some of them, or whichever one you want to answer, and put the questions in the chat. Put the questions in the chat below, or email them to childsd1@nku.edu, or you can put them on social media. So I thank you so much. I'm going to put my final slide up here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I intentionally took my time. Normally in person, I would not. I would not take this long, but intentionally wanted to take my time to give you many resources here. My PowerPoint is not doing what it needs to do, but this is my ending slide. Thank you so much to the Kentucky Council of Post-Secondary Education. There's my email, Northern Kentucky University, and giving us an opportunity to share our work because that's what this is all about. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. David Childs. Hope to hear from you soon. Have a good day. Bye.